Yeah, so this morning we're continuing with our sermon series, as we kind of already mentioned, on the heart of prayer and worship. And we're continuing to look at the heart postures of David in the Psalms. And through the Psalms, we've already had a longing heart, a humble heart, a warrior heart, contented heart, consecrated heart. And this morning we're thinking of and thinking about an authentic heart. An aspect of being authentic is being real. That's one kind of simple aspect of it. And so we need to, in some ways, be real this morning. There might be things this morning that we talk about and share that might be difficult to hear. Difficult to hear for some of us, difficult to receive and to experience. So it's really important to say that as we start and as we go through this morning, that we want this to be a safe space for any of us, whether we are triggered by something, whether something comes up, that this is a safe space to experience that and to experience it in the presence of God, to allow God to be a part of that experience and this space this morning. So I just want to prepare some of us for that. There might be intense feelings of emotion or a reaction, and that's okay. And this is a space where we can do that and we can bring those things to God. So as I said, that we're looking at an authentic heart, and as we look at this, we see it expressed in the Bible through the practice of lament. So if you've got your Bibles or if you've got electronic devices, we're going to look at Psalm 13. Psalm 13, the words are going to be on the screen as well, but might be good for you to have them open in front of you as well. Psalm 13 says this: "How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts, and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer, Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. And my enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall. But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me." David is clearly in pain and is hurting, and he is crying out to God in this psalm, and that is pretty evident as we see those first verses and the words that he's using. He is being real. He is being honest. It is all stripped back and laid bare. He is being authentic. The author and researcher Brené Brown says, "Authenticity is the daily practice of letting go of who we think we're supposed to be and embracing who we are." The daily practice, note daily practice there, of letting go of who we think we are supposed to be and embracing who we are. It's a pretty decent idea or kind of summary of what authenticity is, I think, or to have an authentic heart, but I think it stops a little bit short. For those of us that follow Jesus in a post-truth world, with the rise of AI, where we can decide and we can create what our own reality is. How do we decide who we are? It's crucial more than ever to realize that as followers of Jesus, we don't create our own reality, but we know who we are by looking to God and what God says, by what the Bible tells us and what Jesus models for us. Then we can embrace who we are, but we need to know who we are by looking to God. We can use those words of the famous Psalm 139 that says, "Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there's any offensive way in me and lead me in the way everlasting. So one of the things about having an authentic life or living authentic lives and our prayer and our worship being authentic is that it must be gospel-centered. It must be God-centered, not me-centered or you-centered or I-centered. Always pointing not to ourselves, but to God. Always relying on God and not on ourselves. Always focused on God and not on ourselves. So an authentic heart in prayer and worship is a heart that is always looking to God, that is looking to put God at the center, not about what do I get out of it or how am I feeling about it, but putting God at the center. The second thing about being authentic is that it should model humility, not pride. And we see this when we look at the life of Jesus and all of the different examples that we see in the Gospels of what Jesus shows us of modeling humility. Tim Keller says, spiritual pride is the illusion that we are competent to run our own lives, achieve our own sense of self-worth, and find a purpose big enough to give us meaning in life without God. By practicing humility, we acknowledge our limitations and our frailty. So often in church or in Christian circles, we can put a brave face on. We can pretend that everything is good because we think that's the way it should be. We're worried about admitting that maybe it's not all perfect yet. But when we come with humility and we admit and are honest with our limitations and our frailty and our humanity, then it provides a space for our brokenness to turn into openness. True openness. Not the openness where when someone says to you this morning, "How are you doing?" you say, "I'm fine." When really, there is so much stuff going on under the surface that you're not fine. True openness. We can all be very good at pretend openness or giving the appearance of openness, but by doing that we are missing the opportunities to be blessed through and in our brokenness. By attempting to ignore it, by attempting to sweep it under the rug, by attempting to work around it, we limit what we may experience from God in his graciousness. The third thing is that authentic lives are sincere. Jesus says in Luke 12 in the Message translation, "You can't keep your true self hidden forever. Before long, you'll be exposed. You can't hide behind a religious mask forever. Before long, you'll be exposed. You can't hide. Sooner or later, the mask will slip, and your true face will be known. You can't whisper one thing in private and preach the opposite in public. The day is coming when those whispers will be repeated all over town." Living lives that are sincere. That the things that are hidden or behind closed doors are also the same things that are in the open. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the great pastor and theologian, says, "An authentic Christian community, by sheer grace, God will not permit us to live even for a brief period in a dream world. He does not abandon us to those rapturous experiences and lofty moods that come over us like a dream. God is not a God of the emotions, but the God of truth. Only that fellowship which faces such disillusionment with all its unhappy and ugly aspects begins to be what it should be in God's sight, begins to grasp in faith the promise that is given to it. A community which cannot bear and cannot survive such a crisis, which insists upon keeping its illusion when it should be shattered, permanently loses in that moment the promise of Christian community. Sooner or later, it will collapse. And that's because God created us to be in community. Firstly, with him, and also with one another, with each other. But these are dynamic relationships. Being authentic is messy and imperfect and time-consuming, and a journey that we are all on. Jesus challenged his own disciples on their relationships with each other when they were trying to make sure that one of them was the top spot in the group. Sometimes the biggest challenge might be how we treat each other rather than how we treat the world out there. But as a community without it, without being authentic, we cannot build trust, we cannot build connections, we cannot build relationships. We stay with a surface level of intimacy, with masks and barriers in place. And I don't know about you, but you get to the point where you just think, what's the point in that? There's a lot of other places we could go and find some of that. This morning, there's a lot of warmer places we could go to and find something of that. Sim Dendi calls this the root stuff that needs to be worked out. The root work before the fruit work, before the fruit of the Spirit is worked out in and through us. And if it is like that for us as a community, it is even more so true of our relationship with God. If we don't have authentic hearts, then we can have a shallow faith. We can stay on the surface because it's not allowing God into all of our areas of life. Being real, being vulnerable, being honest about who we are, how we are, and where we are in our lives. So having an authentic heart in prayer and in worship, it's not about being perfect. It's never about being perfect, because if you haven't worked it out yet, none of us are. This side of eternity, it's not going to be perfect. It's not about having it all together, because as hopefully all of us know, that's not how life is all of the time. But about being honest and sincere and open to God and open to one another. In the Bible, we see this being expressed in that practice of lament. And this is what Psalm 13 is. It's lament. Lament is a prayer to God in the context of suffering and distress. And it helps us to turn towards God and not away in those moments. It enables us to find a way through suffering and not around it, which is what the world does. When it faces suffering, it looks to go around. Lament helps us to go through suffering. It is praying through suffering, and somehow, it generates hope and keeps faith alive, however faintly. Even if it feels like you are holding on with your fingernails. And it doesn't deny the reality of the present experience that you might be feeling or going through. Again, something that the world does is try to deny the present reality. Old Testament scholars estimate that about 2/3 of the Psalms are laments or contain aspects of laments in them. 2/3 of the Psalms. There's Psalm 13 here, there's Psalm 6, Psalm 22, Psalm 44, Psalm 88. There's so many of them when you look at them, and they can be expressing things individually, from an individual person's point of view, or as a whole community. And there's four kind of features that we can kind of group prayers of lament into. The first thing is that the author directs their complaint to God. If you've got Psalm 13 open still and you can see it, you'll be able to see this in there. That the author directs their complaint to God. David, here in Psalm 13, is directing it straight to God. How long, Lord? Straight to God with the complaint. The address to God is forthright and it's insistent. It's not a very kind of nice middle-class English kind of request to God. Second thing is that the author describes their suffering. It is completely honest and full of feeling. Opening questions have this kind of evocative nature to them. There's forgotten and hidden and lonely and sorrow and grieving and defeated and darkness and death. This is the place that David is coming from in this psalm. How many times do we use that language when we talk to God? But it uses this open and this figurative language, which means it allows a wide range of application and interpretation to everyone. It's not specific to one kind of situation. You can use this language and apply it in so many different places. The third thing is that the author depends on God to come to the aid of his people. David describes the distress, and then he asks God to respond. And the fourth thing is that the author dwells on God's faithfulness and goodness. It moves from lament and complaint towards trust and praise. Lament is not an end of itself, but paves the way for a renewed place of trust and praise. The supreme biblical example of lament is the character of Job in the Old Testament. And the difference between Job, if you know the story, and his comforters, his supposed friends in the story, is that he actually prayed through his experience, whereas they talked about prayer to him. We can often do that. We can talk about it a lot. Job prays through his experience. And here in Psalm 13, even in the waiting, even during the difficult times, David remembers the good that God has done. His heart still rejoices in praise and in gratitude. And this is really important for us as we think about having an authentic heart in worship for two really important reasons. The first is that if we don't, then I believe it's dishonoring to God. And I believe it's dishonoring to God because it suggests, or we suggest, that God cannot handle it. We make the decision that God could not possibly handle what we want to bring to him. Parts of our true selves and true lives and true experiences. God cannot deal with it. We cannot be real with God. Which means we are deciding what God can and cannot deal with. And the second thing is that I think it does a disservice to the world around us. It limits our effectiveness at being witnesses in the world. Because the world cannot do this. The world doesn't have an answer for this. When we were in hospital with Raphael, our middle child, the first time, when he'd just been born, he's a few days old, and we were in the ICU down in Great Ormond Street. And at that point, before his first surgery, he had one-on-one care with a nurse in his own room. So the one nurse was there for her entire 12-hour shift, and we were in there with him. And so you can imagine over 12 hours with a newborn baby who didn't talk or didn't do anything, there's one other person in the room with you, and so there was a lot of time to chat. It was my idea of a nightmare. But there were lots of conversations with nurses over these days, And I'll never forget, there was one with one nurse, and she'd been there for a number of years, and she'd been doing this job, and she'd been looking after sick children and sick babies, and she'd seen it all. And we were chatting, and as it did, it was often kind of, what do you do? I said, well, actually, I'm a pastor at, at a church. And, oh, okay, and then that kind of leads on to things. And she said one time about the role and what she'd seen and those kind of things. She said, I find it when I have parents coming to me, she said, as I'm looking after their child, and they're saying to me, why is this happening? Or what's going on? Or what can we do? And I kind of said, yeah, that's really tough. I'm here at the moment thinking the same things with my child and asking God those things as I get that. And she said, and they say those things to me, and I don't really know what to say, and I don't really know what to do. And I said, yeah, I can imagine that's really hard. I don't know what to say and don't know what to do. And she said, no, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. And I realized that she was looking at me, and she was looking for an answer. And this woman who had been in this role, in this job, who had seen all of those things, had no way of expressing it, had no way to share with someone how they could deal with it. And if we as a church and as a people don't have the answer and cannot lament ourselves, we do a disservice to the world that is crying out for it. So that is a bit on lament. But I'm going to invite Neil to come up now. And Neil is going to share with us a little bit about his journey, about his story, and lament within that. So, welcome. And I'm just going to hand over to you, and you're going to share. Thanks, Neil.
Thank you. For the last 7 months, I've been involved in making a film with BBC Panorama. It's going to be broadcast on Thursday evening at 9 o'clock, and the title is My Teacher, the Abuser, Fighting for Justice. This bit of story started back on the 27th of July last year when Nicky Campbell, on his Radio 5 live show, burst into tears as he talked about witnessing a teacher at the school he was at abusing a child. It was broadcast again at lunchtime that day, and Karen and I always watch the news at 1. And I watched Nicky cry. Nicky was the year above me at school. And the guy he was talking about was a chap called Ian Wares. When I was 10, Ian Wares was my class master for that year. He was my teacher. Every day, for the entire of that year, he sexually and physically abused me and my friends, probably 3/4 of the class. To say he is Savile-like in his impact wouldn't be an understatement. He taught for 11 years in Scotland, and then he went back to South Africa, where he extended his teaching career out to a total of 40 years. He has abused thousands of boys. That's the Market radio walkie-talkies saying hello to us. He has abused thousands of boys with hundreds of thousands of offences. In January, a boy came forward in South Africa. Well, I say a boy, he's now in his 50s. And he said that he too had been abused by Ian Wares. That put me in a bit of a tailspin, because we were hoping, he's 84, he's still alive, he's in South Africa. We were hoping he was going to be extradited to Scotland to face justice for his crimes. And we realised, the group of survivors, that actually there's a good chance he won't if he faces a trial in South Africa. So in April, I went to Cape Town and went to see him answering the charge of abusing the man that we're going to call Stephen, his South African victim. But before I went out there, Stephen and I started chatting on WhatsApp, and he knew that I was a Baptist minister, and he asked me this question. He said, "My Bible tells me that blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." And he said, "When am I going to be comforted?" And that goes to the very heart of the authentic heart that Kieran's been talking about. It goes to the place of lament and taking it to God. We talked about that at the time. And then I met him in South Africa, and I cried as he talked about how Wales abused him, because the words he used were almost identical to the words are in my police statement with Police Scotland. And then a month ago, he contacted me again, and we had a video chat, and he said, I'm really struggling with this. He said, where was God when Wales was doing this to me? And I stopped, and we've already mentioned Job. I said, the answer's in the book of Job. The answer's in the book of Job. Job wrestles with this. Why has all this happened to me? Where's God in it? What's God's purpose in it? Thank you, Market. Is that a prompt to hurry up? I said, we haven't got time to go through the book of Job. It would take 2 or 3 sermons to explore it properly. But ultimately, God is a good, good father. And sometimes we have this thing where we say, oh, God intended this bad to happen so that he could teach me something. Many of us in this room are parents. Which one of you would will your child to have a heart defect so that you could learn something? Which one of you would will that your 10-year-old child spends a year being abused by a teacher so that 50 years later he can stand in a room and share a story? You wouldn't. God has no agency in it. Bad things happen because of sin in the world. And Stephen and I talked about this. God has no agency in the abuse. God has no agency in the suffering. Sure, God is perfectly capable of stepping in and doing anything he wants to at any time. But the book of Job tells us that he doesn't work like that, and that sin creates disorder in this world. Then I talked about a song that we sing here with him. And it goes, all my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. Those who sat near me in church when we sung that, if you've looked, you'll see sometimes I'm crying when we sing that. Sometimes I'm weeping, and there have been occasions when I've had shoulder-heaving sobs as we sing it. Sorry, it's difficult to keep track of my notes with tears in my eyes. We're encouraged today to have an authentic heart. When I sing that song, I'm crying for what happened to me. I'm crying for what happened to my friends. I'm crying for the incredible life-changing consequences of that. David's Psalms are full of similar... Okay, I'll take the hint. David's Psalms are full of similar tears. Yet, whilst I have no sense of God having been there when I was a 10-year-old boy, I know the truth. God bears no responsibility for what happened. And if you were to ask the question, where was God when it was happening? He was right there beside me. The God who wept at the graveside of Lazarus, distraught at the damage that death had done, despite knowing he was about to raise Lazarus from the dead, is the God who wept whilst I was being abused. So in worship, I can be honest about my feelings of having been let down by God, because that's how it feels. Why didn't you stop it, God? I'm sure you guys have cried that out about Raf's heart. That's being authentic. I can lament about what happened to me and others. I can pray it through with God. And like David, I can sing the truth I know, even if I don't feel it. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. David put it like this in the psalm that Kieran used. The words in the psalm say, "But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me." Whatever your circumstance, God is, God has been, God is, and God will be good. He will be faithful. We can't explain why bad things happen other than they're a result of the disorder of sin. God isn't responsible in any way, nor does he will it. He may redeem it, but that's a different matter. Tiny part of my story will be on Panorama on BBC One this Thursday at 9 o'clock. Just want to finish by saying, no matter what has happened in your life, be authentic with God. Lament, be honest, and turn to worship him from that place.
Thank you, Neil. Neil is probably not the only person who has experienced abuse in this room, in whatever form that may have taken. We want to be a church where we feel safe to share this. A safe and welcoming space for victims and survivors of abuse. If you are affected, if this has raised anything for you, please know that you can come and you can speak to anyone here on the safeguarding team here at Mariners. But if you need some other resources, there's a few websites that are hopefully going to be coming up on the screen. There's the NAPAC, which is the National Association for People Abused in Childhood. There's 1 in 4, and there's the website 318. If you need to take a note of any of those, then do. If you need them again, then just come and ask me at the end. We're going to move shortly into a time of communion. But before we do that, we're going to spend time writing our own laments, of praying our own laments. Debbie's going to give out some paper and some pens. If you want to write it on your phone, if you prefer to do that, you can do. But it is really easy to talk about this stuff and not to do it, to not be authentic about it. We're going to put up those 4 prompts up on the screen about lament. Directing your complaint to God, describe your suffering, depend on God to come to your aid, dwell on God's faithfulness and goodness. This isn't something where we're going to mark you at the end of it. This isn't some sort of kind of getting it perfect. But a moment for you to practice this lament. Maybe you do it already, and maybe lament is something you're well accustomed to. Maybe you know about it and you pray the Psalms in that way, but perhaps you've never written your own. And it's a really good way of understanding lament as we make it something personal to us and to our lives. So we're just going to spend some time, we're going to have some music playing, Owen's going to put some music on. Just take this moment to enter into lament.